I babysat for one family regularly through most of high school, a couple with two young kids, 6 and 8, who lived in a fairly large house out on a few acres, far enough from neighbors that you couldn't see another house's lights from any of their windows. I'd been sitting for them for almost a year by the time this happened, so I knew the house well, knew the kids' routines, knew exactly where everything was. That familiarity is part of why what happened felt so wrong, because nothing about that night should have been unusual to me at all. The house had a baby monitor system left over from when the youngest was small, an old two-way intercom setup with a unit in the kids' playroom and a matching one in the kitchen, so a parent could talk to a child in the playroom from anywhere else on the main floor. The parents had mentioned it to me casually when I started sitting for them, said I could use it if I wanted to check on the kids without walking all the way down the hall, though I rarely bothered, since the kids were usually old enough to just call out if they needed something. That night, the kids went to bed around 9 without incident, same as always. I was in the living room around 10:30, watching TV with the volume low when the kitchen intercom unit crackled on by itself, which I remember specifically because it required someone to physically press and hold a button on the playroom end to activate it. It didn't just turn on randomly. Through it, very faint, I heard breathing, slow, deliberate, definitely not the sound either kid made in their sleep, which I was familiar with from years of checking on them. I got up and walked toward the kids' hallway, telling myself one of them was probably just awake and playing with the intercom unit as a joke. Kids do that. Both bedroom doors were shut, same as I'd left them at bedtime. I checked on each kid individually, quietly opening their doors, and found both of them fast asleep, exactly as expected. No sign either had been up recently. The playroom itself was down the hall past their bedrooms, its own separate room. I hadn't gone in there yet that night. I walked down and found the door slightly ajar, though I distinctly remembered closing it fully after the kids finished playing earlier in the evening, part of my normal routine before their bedtime. I pushed it open and turned on the light. Empty, completely normal looking, toys where they'd been left. Nothing disturbed. I checked the intercom unit itself, sitting on a low shelf, and the button that required physical pressure to activate transmission was not being held down by anything. No toy propped against it. Nothing. And yet, according to the parents when I mentioned it to them later, that unit couldn't transmit sound at all unless the button was actively being pressed. It had no open mic or voice-activated function whatsoever. They'd specifically chosen that model years earlier because they didn't want it picking up ambient household noise. I went back to the living room, unsettled but telling myself it was probably some kind of electrical fault in an old device, and tried to get back to the movie I'd been half watching. About 40 minutes later, the kitchen unit crackled on again, same slow breathing, and this time underneath it, very faint, a child's voice, saying something I couldn't fully make out except for one clear word, which was my name. I went back to that hallway immediately, checked both kids again, both still fast asleep, neither showing any sign of having spoken or moved. I went to the playroom again, door ajar again, despite me having pulled it fully shut myself less than an hour earlier. The intercom sitting exactly where it had been, button untouched, unpressed, impossible by design to have transmitted anything at all. I called the parents that night, earlier than I normally would have for a non-emergency, mostly just needing to hear another adult's voice confirm I wasn't losing my mind. The mother, when I described what happened, went quiet for a moment before telling me something she'd apparently never mentioned to me before in the entire year I'd been sitting for them. The house's previous owners, before they bought it, had lost a child in an accident somewhere on the property years before, and the family had specifically kept that playroom's location the same as it had been under the previous owners, despite briefly considering converting it into something else when they first moved in, because their own kids had immediately gravitated to that exact room and seemed happiest playing there more than anywhere else in the house. She told me, in a tone that made it clear this wasn't the first strange thing that had ever happened in that room. Just possibly the first thing serious enough that I'd actually witnessed it directly. That she'd always chosen to interpret whatever occasionally happened in there as harmless, even protective, rather than something to be afraid of. Gently, if I felt comfortable finishing out the night. I did finish the shift, mostly because I didn't want to leave the kids alone even briefly while waiting for someone to relieve me. But I sat directly outside the playroom door for the rest of the night, rather than in the living room, and the intercom never activated again. I kept babysitting for that family for another year after that, and the intercom never did it again either, not once, no matter how many nights I worked there afterward. I never did find out whose breathing I heard that night, or whose voice said my name through a device that, by every technical explanation anyone could offer me, should not have been able to transmit anything at all. I want to preface this by saying I babysat for probably a dozen different families over the years I did it seriously, and this is the only time I ever genuinely feared for my life while doing it. The only time I actually called the police during a job rather than after the fact. It happened with a family I'd only sat for twice before, a single mother with one daughter, about 7 years old, living in a townhouse in a fairly normal, fairly safe suburban neighborhood. Nothing about the situation should have felt dangerous going in. The mother left around 7 that evening for what she said was a work dinner running late. Told me she'd probably be back by midnight. Gave me the usual information, emergency contacts, the daughter's bedtime routine, and left. The evening went completely normally for the first couple hours. I got the daughter fed, let her watch some TV, started her bedtime routine around 8:30, all standard. Around 9, putting the daughter to bed, I glanced out her bedroom window, which faced the street, purely out of habit, and noticed a car parked directly across the street that hadn't been there earlier in the evening, engine off. No visible movement inside that I could tell from that distance in the dark. I didn't think much of it at first. People park on residential streets, it's not inherently suspicious. I finished getting the daughter to bed and went back downstairs to the living room, which also had a window facing the street, and checked again. The car was still there, same position, still no movement visible. I sat down to watch TV and tried not to think about it too much, though I found myself checking the window every 10 minutes or so, an itch I couldn't quite ignore. Around 9:45, I checked again and the car was gone. I remember actually feeling relieved, thinking whatever it had been, a neighbor visiting someone waiting for a call, it had resolved itself normally. That relief didn't last long. About 15 minutes later, I heard something at the back of the house, near the kitchen door, that led out to a small fenced patio. A distinct sound of the door handle being tried, twisted, not forced exactly, just tested, the way you'd check if a door was locked before deciding what to do next. I froze completely, staying as quiet as I could, listening. The handle tried again a few seconds later, same deliberate, unhurried motion. I moved to the kitchen doorway, staying back from any window where I might be visible, and through the small window in the door itself, I could make out a shape, a person, standing just outside, close enough that I could see they were facing the door directly, though the porch light back there was off, and I couldn't make out any real detail about them beyond a general silhouette. I backed away as quietly as I could and went straight upstairs to check on the daughter first, who was thankfully still asleep. Then locked myself in her room with her and called 911, keeping my voice as low as possible while I explained the situation. The dispatcher kept me on the line, walking me through securing the room further, asking me to stay quiet and stay put until officers arrived. While on that call, I heard from downstairs, very clearly, the front door handle being tried too, same deliberate testing motion, followed a minute later by a knock, 3 slow knocks, unhurried, almost polite, the kind of knock you'd use if you had every reason to expect someone would eventually answer. Not the kind of knock someone makes if they think no one's home or don't want to be heard. The police arrived within about 10 minutes, though it felt considerably longer, sitting in that locked bedroom with a frightened, now awake 7-year-old asking me what was wrong. When officers did their perimeter check, they found no one on the property at all, no vehicle matching what I'd described anywhere nearby, and no physical evidence, no footprints in the small garden bed beneath the kitchen door, despite the ground being soft from recent rain, that would confirm anyone had actually been standing there. The mother came home shortly after the police finished their sweep, understandably shaken by the whole situation, and mentioned something to the responding officer that I only partially overheard at the time, but thought about constantly afterward. She said this wasn't the first time something like this had happened at that specific address, that the previous tenants, before she'd moved in a couple years earlier, had also reported a similar pattern to police. Someone testing doors, knocking politely, Never seen clearly, never caught on any camera, despite a doorbell camera being installed by that point, which should have captured something, anything, approaching the front door closely enough to knock on it. I never sat for that family again, not out of any bad feeling toward the mother, who was lovely and clearly just as unsettled as I was, but because I genuinely couldn't make myself go back into that house after dark. I heard, much later, second-hand through a mutual friend, that the family eventually moved, and that the pattern, whatever it actually was, reportedly continued for whoever moved in after them. I still don't know what I saw through that kitchen door window, or who tested those 2 doors and knocked 3 times with no evidence left behind at all. I only know that to this day, if I hear a knock I'm not expecting, especially somewhere quiet, especially at night, I need a solid few seconds before I can make myself go answer it.